Today we're here to answer the question, are motorcycles really invisible? Welcome back to 4K Motoring. I'm Chris, and today we're going to discuss 4 reasons why motorcycles may seem invisible on the road. Now I know what you're thinking. Right behind me you can see these 2 large ADV bikes, and in no way do they seem like they are hiding. But let me tell you, there are 4 major reasons why motorcycles have gotten the reputation for being such dangerous machines on the road, and what we can do about it. To start with, we will address the elephant in the room, and that is just the sheer size of these things. Compared to a car, a motorcycle takes up much less space. It is so much easier to miss when you glance around on a street. That's going to be important for 2 real reasons. The first thing I want to talk about is motion camouflage. Now, this is almost directly related to how narrow and how small these vehicles are. Now, typical humans have 2 eyes. They're spread apart, and that gives us depth perception. Based on that, we kind of calculate distance of objects and speed of objects as they approach us. We are used to, as drivers, seeing other cars on the road all the time. And we're pretty used to seeing 2 headlights coming down the road and able to judge their speed relatively accurately. Now, when it comes to something like a motorcycle, especially when we think about some of these smaller cruisers that are really dark in color, they have a single headlight. When one of those is coming straight at you, it takes a while before you can really tell the thing is even moving. It is very hard for drivers and people in general to use their depth perception to figure out how close that object is, how close that motorcycle is, and how fast it's approaching. It probably doesn't help that we usually approach a little bit faster than cars. Motion camouflage is definitely one of the big issues when people pull out in front of us, because they did see us, they saw the motorcycle, but they were really having a hard time judging how fast it was approaching and how far away it was. That smaller size is also to our detriment with something called saccadic masking. Now, if you guys aren't familiar, your eyes play tricks on your brain. That's right, your brain makes up a lot of what you see. It's not something that your eyes actually send signals, your brain just makes it up. That's why you see smooth motion everywhere. Now, what we found is as the human eye looks from side to side, glances side to side, it doesn't see smooth images like a movie. That's actually a trick our brain is playing on our eyes. Really what happens is our eyes are taking snapshots. They're getting moments in time. As we gaze across a road, checking our cross traffic, it is actually taking snapshots at different intervals. That way we can get a decent picture of what's going on. Unfortunately, those snapshots tend to miss things as our eyes move. As we've said, motorcycles tend to be a little bit smaller than cars. They have smaller cross sections, especially headed towards you. So those moments can be very vital to us. Now, both of these things also kind of tie back to another human trait that is self-preservation. As humans, we don't want to do anything that's going to harm ourselves. If you see a large semi-truck, you're a lot less likely to put up in front of it. Something like a motorcycle seems less like a threat, so our brains won't prioritize it for us. So there's lots of tricks happening up here that are just the way we are as humans that make these things not a threat and not visible. And that's going to be our third reason, inattentional blindness. Now again, it's not something that people are intentionally doing generally. This is something that happens in the background of our mind just because of the way our brain works. We're looking for things that will harm us and things that reward us. While your eyes are sweeping and taking in information rapidly, your brain has to prioritize a lot of things. And one of the things it prioritizes is its own self-preservation. So seeing a small motorcycle headed towards us that it can't gauge the speed or distance, realistically, you're not going to stand out and grab the attention of that person's brain. You're not going to force it to look at you. So all these things that we're talking about so far are kind of related. Due to the small size and nature of motorcycles, we have people that can't tell how far away we are and how fast we're approaching. They may miss us because of that when they're looking side to side based on the way their eyes work. And even if they do see glimpses of us, their brain won't prioritize us and actually make them pause or pay attention to us. So far, that's not a good setup. The fourth thing we're going to discuss here on 4K Motoring is lighting. Now, if you guys have not followed along, Teslas with their auto-driving cars have been a good example of this. Their autopilot system has actually run over motorcyclists on the road while driving. Multiple. Tesla has released statements explaining this phenomenon. What happens is their cars use camera-based systems exclusively for autopilot. They don't have any radar or LiDAR sensors. They rely purely on vision, same as humans. So this is kind of a relatable thing. What happens is that motorcycles that have two taillights side by side, think kind of Harley street glides, stuff like that, have those two little taillights, they are very car-like because there are two, but they're very narrow because it's a motorcycle. These cameras see these lights and misjudge it as a car far away. Remember that depth perception thing? It sees these lights close together, which generally means it's a car farther away, and it just runs over the motorcycles. Same thing can happen for the front of these things. Some of the bikes that have two lights versus one, if they're really close together, they can act as the same phenomenon, making it even harder for cars to recognize that the motorcycle is approaching. Luckily, this is not nearly as scary as it sounds. There's a couple simple things we can do to start changing the odds and make ourselves more visible on the road and demand attention from drivers. Now, I'm for sure going to ruffle some feathers with this first tip, but it's one that I stick to time and time again. I think it's probably the most important thing to keep with you that will keep you safe on the road on a motorcycle. And that is to be visible and be predictable. This strategy by itself will reduce more negative interactions with vehicles on the road than pretty much anything else in my mind. Now, what do I mean by that? Be predictable. What do car drivers typically see on the road? Other cars, right? Cars tend to act a certain way in traffic, and that's what people are used to seeing. When they see a car coming down the road, they're used to about how fast those cars are going. When they're speeding up, slowing down, turning, that's what they're used to seeing, and that's what they're looking for. That's what their brains have been conditioned to look for, and that's what they're paying attention to. Motorcycles, by their very nature, are a lot quicker to accelerate, to decelerate, and they tend to dart in and out a lot more rapidly than cars do. This is counter to what people have been conditioned to look for and what they're paying attention to on the roadway. If you're not doing things that other cars do, people may not see you. Which goes into the second part of that, which is be visible. It is super cool to have the all black bikes with all black gear. I've done it before. It is really popular right now to have the gray bikes, the gray gear, things that match the color of the road, the color of the sky, don't stand out at all. Unfortunately, if they don't stand out at all, how well do you think drivers can see them? Now, I've gone through efforts to make my bike more visible, getting rid of all the black plastic that is matte and absorbs light to make this thing very contrasty and make it stand out on the roadway. When we got our F800 GS, there was a black one exactly the same at the dealership at the same time for the same price. Looked a lot cooler, not going to argue with that, but that white is just more visible on the road. When we talk about gear as well, just a couple years ago, it was very common to have these bright colors and high contrast. Because they weren't selling well, people tend to buy these gray, white, black, things that are very road colored right now. I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's going to be very hard to be visible on the road and definitely something to avoid. Now, as a combination, we're going to talk about lighting strategies we can use to make our bikes just a little bit more visible on the road. What I want to focus on here is the side auxiliary lights. Now, I've added the crash bars to my bike and pushed these lights out as wide as I can go, obviously one on each side. And by pushing the lights out as wide as you can get them, having a set of driving lights or marker lights that are as far apart as they possibly can be, that's going to eliminate some of the depth perception issues or the speed and distance recognition issues that people are going to have. The more you look like a car, the wider and closer you get to being a car, the easier it's going to be for people to associate you with normal traffic and what they're used to seeing. Along with that, getting some different levels of lighting so we're not exactly in line with vehicles, so we have some higher lights and lower lights to give us that triangle of light. Typically is something that gets people's attention a little bit more based on a couple studies, and it's pretty useful. Now, I'll leave a link to a post RevZilla just made about reflective stuff on motorcycle gear, and actually how some of that reflectivity is making it harder for some of these adaptive cruise control and automatic braking systems that vehicles have. Makes it harder for them to see motorcyclists. As we look to the rear of motorcycles, we can see another problem. This black plastic they tend to put on all these bikes nowadays is very hard to see. It reflects no light, whether it's headlights or sunlight, and it makes these things about invisible. Something simple like adding this 3M adhesive tape here, the Scotch-Brite tape, that is highly reflective, but when light is not directly shaped at it or directly thrown at it, it looks black and kind of blends in, is a pretty cool addition. It doesn't make the bike stand out, but man, with a little bit of light, these things absolutely light up at night. The other thing that we can do is add some more lighting to the rear. Now, most bikes have these two little lights, maybe a single light, maybe two sideways lights, that are your running lights. kind of hard to see really at night. Something simple like the break-free wearable light that you can get on your helmet makes a good addition, something that throws light a little bit away from the bike itself. It's pretty nice. But we can also add some other lighting to increase our visibility. Something like a strobing brake light or additional brake light, or possibly just an additional running light, can make a huge difference in the visibility of these bikes. Another consideration we have as motorcyclists is lane position. Now this is something you've probably seen in your MSF manual or your state DMV test. Typically when riding a motorcycle, we have a typical lane divided up into 3 sections. We have the left, the center, and the right. Each of these positions has some advantages and disadvantages while riding a motorcycle, and realistically there are times to be in each one of them. Obviously you always want to give yourself the absolute most time and distance to react, as well as put yourself in the most visible spot on the road. And finally, keep training. The more training you have and the better your skills are, the more you're going to be able to react to hazards on the road, both to anticipate them, predict them, and avoid them, as well as react to them if they were to happen. Unfortunately, the vast majority of motorcycle riders out there don't use their bike to their full potential. They don't train with it regularly. They don't practice stopping to get that distance down as small as it can be. They don't practice really maneuvering the bike. And frankly, they don't pay attention a whole lot. Combine that with some excessive speed and maybe a little bit of alcohol, and you have yourself a recipe for a pretty bad time. Now, this can be as simple as going to your local parking lot every week and practicing some slow speed maneuvers, practice some emergency braking, and just doing that yourself. Or something like going and taking a class. There are no limits to the amount of classes out there for advanced skills, advanced disciplines, stuff like that, just to make you a better rider. If you're in North Carolina, there is the Bike Safe program. It's actually put on by the state and it is totally free. You can sign up. There's a whole calendar. You can sign up. They run them every week in all over the state. Just free rider training with local motor officers. It's a pretty cool experience. So simply to answer the question, are motorcycles invisible? No, they're not. But that has a lot to do with how you ride and what you've done to your motorcycle. We have to make drivers pay attention to us, and we have to do things that drivers' brains are looking for. That way we can stay safe while riding on the road. If you guys find value in this sort of content, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have any other tips for new riders or experienced riders, leave them down in the comments below. I'm sure everybody would appreciate it. As always, I'm Chris, this is 4K Motoring, and we'll see you next time.